Gary and I, we're going to switch gears a little bit and dive into a little bit more of the digital landscape, of course, but this time from more of a privacy and competition angle. So for this journey, exploring this privacy and competition nexus, I'm here with Gary Davis, Senior Director for Regulatory and Legal at Apple. Welcome, Gary. How are you today?
Oh, I should hold this.
Yes, please take the microphone.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me along, and thank you for Forum Europe for organising the event. And yeah, I'm looking forward to probably one of my first discussions as I segue out of my privacy role into my regulatory role. And I see many familiar faces here in the room. One of them left actually, but he apologised as he was doing so. So I'm sure he had a good reason.
Wonderful. So you and I have had the chance to work together a little bit in the past through a different conference that was a little while back. Some time has passed. Everything has sort of been moving very quickly, it feels like. And of course, I know that you've worked a very long time in the privacy space, both on the compliance side, on the regulatory side, on the enforcement side. But indeed, and you mentioned already a little bit, if I understand correctly, you're kind of switching up roles, you're taking on a new path. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, happy to do so. So you're right. Oh, Gwen, come on, seriously. You can leave, of course. I'm not making people stay. So yeah, I was the Irish Deputy Data Protection Commissioner from 2006 to 2013, which is, I guess, nearly 20 years now. That's kind of shocking to me. And at that point then, I joined Apple, being responsible for privacy here initially in Europe, and then I took on global responsibility. But somewhere around about 2020, and we'll get onto it, I found myself for the first time having to deal with competition issues in a privacy context, and gradually somewhere there I started doing more and more of it, where I was literally standing in that nexus between the two, to a point where it became clear to me that perhaps it was time for me to spend more of my time in it. And maybe for those of you in the room who work predominantly on privacy, maybe I'm here to show you there's a career path outside of privacy, actually, which I was never clear before that there was, but it turns out that there may well be.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of exciting things in the future in this privacy and competition space. But with all that you know and all of your past experience in privacy and kind of coming into this new field, why do you think privacy is so important in the competition context, but also vice versa? So why is competition, similarly important in the privacy space?
Yeah. So I think I could talk at length without you having to ask me another question about this, but I don't think that would be great for people. I guess I was thinking about how to frame this, and the way I thought of it in my head was a kind of timeline in Apple. And so 2003, if you'll allow me to go back that far, Safari, the first browser to disable or block third-party cookies by default. Everybody's happy. Great for privacy. iPhone is launched in 2008, I believe. App Store is available in 2009. First place where users are able to download third-party apps and trust them. Trust built upon control and protections built in at the operating system level. Always being built upon, everybody happy. 2011-12, we introduced iMessage, FaceTime, Siri, Maps, end-to-end encrypted communication services, which were a little bit pertinent to that last panel, I guess. And Siri and services which provide great experiences to users, but without Apple collecting their data, everybody's happy. Updates made to controls on the device, so whether it's location data, access to the microphone, the camera, advertising with the advertising ID known as the IDFA. People happy, I think, along there. So, you know, privacy and privacy being a good thing. 2017, we launched Intelligent Tracking Prevention, which I can talk a little bit about maybe more later, which is built into Safari, which was kind of upping the game beyond just blocking third-party cookies to actually try and block some of the pervasive tracking that was taking place as people were using Safari. Little bit of noise for the first time of some people going, hold on a second, is this actually Apple doing this for privacy reasons, or is there some other reason associated with it? So we're starting to see an intersection, albeit clearly from the privacy reason perspective, we're going, look, we're doing basic privacy goodness here. And then obviously you come to 2000, we launched privacy nutrition labels on the App Store, truly amazing thing which required developers to actually disclose their practices for collecting data in a consistent way that people can compare. And you begin to hear some noise, why is Apple doing that? Because it's outing practices. And then also, and I think we'll talk about it in a while, we also announced in 2020 app tracking transparency, which was probably the first real foray into us understanding that when we do something from a basic privacy goodness perspective, which we would say it is, that actually one needs to step back a little bit and begin examining how is the world going to see it from a competition perspective. And that is the same with some of the features on the device. So even when we make updates now to some of the prompts that you see when you're accessing apps on your device, or when they're asking you for access to location, all of those things now have changed in terms of how we must view them from the privacy and competition space.
Really interesting. So I'm actually very personally familiar with many of the features that you've mentioned, you know, as a kind of iPhone user, and also as a person working in privacy. So indeed, that's been really interesting to see that evolution and see some of these practical ways that that privacy can be sort of implemented in the everyday devices that we use. And you've mentioned this a bit already, but you know, some of Apple's privacy features have been have attracted some pushback by developers, which I think in turn has sort of exacerbated also you know, additional interest or scrutiny from competition regulators, right? In here, the Apple's app tracking transparency framework has been one of the, you know, maybe one of the main sticking points. So can you tell us, you know, dive a little bit into that and what's really at play here?
Oh, well, I'll certainly have my perspective on what's at play, and then there may be other perspectives on it. It's the exact same thing as 2003, in 2011, in 2012, in 2017. The Apple has, for the longest period of time, wanted privacy and security to be a competitive differentiator. So actually using privacy as a way to distinguish ourselves from other platforms. There are other platforms out there. There is in fact competition between platforms. You, as the users in this room, get to choose which platform you wish to use. And you know, there's two main ones, there's a couple of other ones that are available. And then you've got to make a choice. And we had made the decision that we wanted privacy to be one of the points that our users would think about as they were making the decision whether to switch to the Apple ecosystem or stay on it, actually, which is just as important. And so that's why we continue to invest in it. So we've had this journey of our executives from Tim Cook down being committed deeply to doing the right thing on privacy, personally committed, and you've seen that in a number of public engagements that we've had with governments who've held a slightly different position on it. But we feel that strongly about it, that we must be able to do that. And so when we come along and driven by that desire to differentiate ourselves and introduce app tracking transparency, then I'm going to say we were obviously surprised by the reaction to it, because the world up till then for us in the main, other than a little bit of noise around intelligent tracking prevention on Safari, had been, well done Apple, this is great work, you were empowering users and you were putting them in a position to make decisions. And really app tracking transparency at its core is a development, it's an evolution, not a revolution in control, but an evolution of control that users on our platform have experienced. It's that when an app asks you for access to your location data, your camera data, your Bluetooth, all of those things that you are used to getting a screen about, it is updating the controls for whether your data can be used for advertising purposes by third parties, not even by that app, by third parties who that app might pass it on to. And we had actually introduced a control for users back in 2012 when we introduced them with ad tracking, and we've made various updates to it over the years in response to how the advertising industry was evolving, and at least a perception out there that the advertising industry was constantly trying to find ways around user choice. And so they were happy, as far as we can see, with a world whereby a user didn't have to make that explicit decision. Is this something I want to do or don't want to do? And obviously the world in which we were coming into in updating it was where we saw that users were being tracked and their data was being combined across hundreds of services, it seemed. Using identifiers that were sometimes derived from our devices, and we felt a personal responsibility to do something about it. And this is not a space in which Apple, from our perspective, was competing in, so therefore this felt like the right step. And I can talk a little bit more about the engagements with competition authorities and how I see that going, but that's how we got to there, whereby the privacy team sits down, driven by some of the people that you've met in previous engagements, who are simply driven by the desire that's coming from the top. How do we put users in control? But obviously, that's not enough anymore, is what we're seeing. We should maybe talk a little bit about it.
Really interesting, and I think, so just to dive a little bit more into this kind of interplay also with the ad sector, I think, and maybe a lot of people in this room have also seen that some commentators believe that this ATT framework, which was kind of launched just as Apple was, growing its position in the ad sector, that it does not actually apply to Apple. So, what would you respond to some of these comments, if you could?
Oh yeah, I'm certainly happy to respond to those comments. So, it does apply to Apple. So, App Tracking Transparency Framework does apply precisely to Apple the same way as it applies to other people. It's just actually we don't engage in that kind of behavior where you take data from one entity and combine it with data from another. That is the only circumstance under which a developer has to throw the app tracking transparency permission. If you were in fact just collecting data, so if I'm reading the Guardian newspaper, and the Guardian newspaper wants to use my reading habits in order to be able to serve advertising to me on the Guardian, and doesn't wish to share it to somebody else, it does not have to show the app tracking transparency framework. If, however, the Guardian newspaper wish to take my data and share it with third parties, whether it's data brokers or just other third parties so that data can be combined, it needs to show the app tracking transparency permission. Now, as it happens, I say yes to that for the Guardian. The reason why in my case is that I want to support Guardian journalism, and I want to be able to read the Guardian knowing that I am supporting them in some way so that they can take that data and combine it and share it, because I think that's a fair deal. But I want to make the choice. I don't want the choice to be made for me by somebody else, by some other, an app that I go to or somebody that I don't know and don't have a relationship with. I want to make the choice. And so I will say no if it's the airline that I've just paid money to for a flight that's asking me would I like my data to be shared out, and I've received that from many airlines. I'm not giving you more money, I'm just, I'm flying with you. I don't want my data to be shared around. I don't think that's necessary for me to fly with you. And that's the decision I want to make. However, from the competition perspective, there are some sectors, obviously advertising, and there is, some companies in particular who've taken a very negative view to it because their view is that we are somehow benefiting our business. Now, our business, for advertising purposes, here in Europe, is search ads in the App Store. That is it. It is an ability for developers who want to be featured at the top of the search or want to be featured on the home page in the App Store. That is it. In that world where you're offered search ads, we throw a consent screen so users can decide whether they want that to be personalized or contextual. Personalized is not data from all around. Personalized is your demographic information. So am I living in Ireland? Am I a male aged 50 to, you can add the numbers beyond there and get to it. And do I generally, what kind of apps am I using? And then I go in high level buckets, usually buckets that must have, they have to have at least 5,000 devices in it. And then we have built it such that when those ads are delivered, Apple and the developer do not know what users received the ad and what users clicked on the ad. We've just built some extra privacy magic in there so that that is hidden from us. We are not competing at all in that space. And it just so happens at that time, and this is kind of unfortunate in many respects from the privacy point of view, that business was growing because developers wished to do it because it left open that idea that somehow we were doing it to advantage ourselves, which I don't like, that we have to then answer that because sometimes it's hard to prove a negative. But the absolute reality of it is that these businesses are not competing, and this is driven by privacy only, and how do you give the user a choice. And at the end of the day, what can be wrong with me as the user deciding that I want to share my data with the Guardian so that they can share it out, and that I don't want to share it with an airline that has just flown into a place where I'm paying money. I think that seems fine.
Yeah, thank you for just adding a little bit of the technical background here as well. That's been really interesting. I just also mindful of the time, I do want to leave enough so that we can dive into one of the slightly thornier topics, which is sort of around the broader regulatory landscape here. So, how does Apple kind of see the regulatory landscape specifically with regards to this interplay between the GDPR and the Digital Markets Act? I think that's extremely relevant here. And how have you been engaging with regulators on this, and how do you see them managing this significant interplay?
Yeah, and so this is partially why I have made this transition from being responsible for privacy to being responsible for regulatory matters, as I do feel it is a key place where we need to be engaging in detailed conversations and bringing, at this point, the experience that I have to the table. Expertise, I'm not sure about ability, other people can decide, but at least experience for now. Which is that obviously we are huge supporters of the GDPR. We were the only company who was speaking out in relation to it from 2013 when I joined up as far as its passage in 2018 and afterwards. We were a strong voice for it. Now we continue to feel that way. Now on something like the Digital Markets Act, obviously that brings a different perspective to bear. It applies a competition prism to everything we're doing. And that's fine. We can have that, and I think I'm not saying we shouldn't be subjected to it in certain areas, but if you apply only a competition prism to everything we're doing, well, that will mean that the privacy and security will go away. Maybe not fully away, but they will go away because some of the things that we are doing, which are competitive differentiators, will be subject to a, hold on a second, why is Apple doing that? So if I even just take a quick example, the location prompt screen that you see, that screen is being questioned from a competition perspective because somehow there was a question that by throwing in certain cases, users might say no to apps in a way that they shouldn't be saying no. Now, from the privacy point of view, that seems incredible that would be asked as a question, like just incredible. But if you apply only that competition lens, well then maybe you will end up with those kind of outcomes. So I want to be present, I guess, in order to be able to drive those conversations and actually bring more people to the table. I actually feel that you need to have more voices from the privacy community, from privacy regulators, and I see one of them has just walked back in, sorry to call you out for the second time, and from ENISA, for instance, to be part of the conversation, because I think what has happened is that when Apple says, hold on a second, there are privacy and security issues associated with it, people are suspicious of that now. People worry that we're saying it because somehow we want to retain an entrenched position. But if we have other independent people offer their views and bring their opinions to the table, well then maybe you will end up with a more balanced outcome. And today, I actually don't feel that those voices are being heard sufficiently. Now, I'm not sure if it's because those voices don't want to be heard in this space because it's evolving, or because there isn't the opportunity for them to do so. But I will just certainly say, so I'm also responsible for engagements in the UK. Under the UK equivalent to the DMA, there is a formal in-law requirement for the regulator to take the input of the UK Information Commissioner's Office. Formally required to bring it in. What I see here in Brussels is the high-level group. I see some other little fora, but there is no formal obligation, and so therefore I worry, and I'm living this every day, that when we're having these conversations, that the kind of informed, experienced voices on privacy and security are not getting to offer their views. And I think we would all benefit from those outcomes, because then maybe when we highlight those issues, we will have to make sure those are credible points we're raising, and they will be subject to testing. And then maybe we'll arrive at a better outcome. I feel currently we might actually just be leaning too much towards the competition lens.
Really interesting, and I mean, you know, obviously at Future of Privacy Forum, we kind of look at some of the current issues through a privacy lens and from a privacy perspective. You know, GDPR is it's always there. It's the kind of strong basis and foundation that we have in the broader kind of digital environment. And so, we have a couple of minutes left. Just as a final question to you, you know, what are your wishes? What are your ideas for the future for how privacy and competition can be perhaps better managed? How do you see it evolving?
So we are, well, I kind of almost said it just there, but I'll maybe elaborate on that a little bit more. So obviously next year we will have a review of the Digital Markets Act. We also have national regulators in competition, you know, increasingly looking at issues from a privacy perspective. We've seen that in Germany. We actually have an ECJ decision from 2 years ago that required competition regulators, when looking at matters, to take account of the views of privacy regulators. I think it was to take utmost consideration of them. I think that's very important. I actually believe it is very important that as these issues are being looked at, that we develop a formal framework for those voices to be heard. Not as an afterthought, not as a way of you know, putting questions to them that might perhaps lead to outcomes which you know, will be the right ones from a competition perspective, but actually find a way to put them at the table. So in some respects, it's a call to arms to privacy regulators as well, and to ENISA. I feel as though they need to be at the table, and I feel as though they have to force their way there. Now, through legislation and update, and when the DMA has been reviewed, through greater engagement with the high-level group, but I think we will all end up in better outcomes if their voice is heard. Now, I'm not saying those outcomes will be better for Apple, like absolutely not. I think those outcomes will be better for users. And I think everybody in this room is united, I believe, by a desire to ensure that users get to make the choice and are better protected. And I feel that will ensure that users end up in that better outcome.
Wonderful, thank you, Gary. I certainly like the idea of more better cooperation. So that's really great. Thank you so much for sharing the stage with me. Thank you to the audience. It's been really nice to learn more about this privacy and competition space. Just before